The sun was dipping low over the horizon, painting the Texas plains in bruised oranges and purples when she appeared at the edge of the corral. Barefoot, dust clinging to her skirts, eyes wary and calculating, she moved with a caution born of too many hard years. Every rancher in town would have looked at her and seen nothing more than another problem stranger. A girl who didn't belong, but Caleb Rourke saw something different. He saw the flicker of a life that had been boxed in, restrained, a spark hiding behind layers of hurt. He had been leaning against the rail, mending a fence post, hands calloused, back aching from the week's work. The ranch stretched out behind him, a canvas of rolling grass and timber, the horses grazing lazily, oblivious to the tension hanging in the air. When she walked closer, the breeze carried the scent of sagebrush and rain-damp earth. There was a quiet authority in her movements, though her eyes darted, searching, suspicious. Caleb had seen this before, people who had survived too much, people who didn't trust easy. "You got a moment?" Her voice was low, careful, carrying a weight that made him glance up sharply. She had a small bundle tucked under her arm, leather cracked and worn, tied with rough cord. Not much, but enough to tell him she'd been on the move. Her hands trembled slightly, just enough that the rope on the bundle creaked with every step. She paused, under the shade of the oak, the sun catching strands of her hair like copper threads. I need some help," she said, swallowing hard, eyes flicking to the bundle. It's too tight." Caleb frowned. Too tight. The words were innocuous at first, mundane, but there was a pause afterward, a hesitancy that made him freeze. Something about the way she said it, the almost imperceptible tremor in her breath, told him this wasn't just a rope, a strap, or a sack. No, this was something else. Something that carried history, maybe shame, maybe fear. He stepped closer, slowly, deliberately, not wanting to startle her. The wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of horse sweat, dry soil, and the distant promise of rain. He reached out and touched the leather bundle, careful, gentle. The tension was immediate, electric, like the air before a storm. His hands hovered, unsure, because whatever she was asking, it wasn't just physical. It was intimate, private, dangerous in ways he hadn't prepared for. "Let me help," he said, voice low, calm. His eyes searched hers, looking for permission, a crack in the wall she had built around herself. She nodded barely, and he felt his chest tighten. Caleb had spent his life with hands that could wrestle, steer and repair fences, hands that could pull a man from a river or patch a wound, but nothing had prepared him for this, helping someone with something that wasn't just about muscles but about trust, about letting go. The bundle was heavy, awkward, and she shifted it in her arms. Caleb saw the small scar on her wrist, pale against the sun-darkened skin, a mark of past mistakes, past pain. He recognized it instantly, not because he knew her, but because he had seen scars like that, the ones you carry in your soul as much as your flesh. The hesitation in her movements, the way she avoided his gaze, all of it told him she had learned the hard way not to trust easily. He knelt down, careful to stay in her line of sight, hands hovering near the leather cord. "It's all right," he said softly. "I won't break it." Her lips parted slightly, almost a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Those eyes, they were still wary, calculating, and they held a story he wanted to know but didn't dare ask. The cord bit into her fingers, and she sighed softly, almost. He pulled the cord gently, careful not to tug too hard. "Better?" he asked. She nodded slightly, shoulders relaxing a fraction. Caleb noticed the way her fingers unclenched, the way her breath came a little easier. For a moment, the world seemed to shrink to just the two of them, the bundle, and the fading light. The horses shifted in the corral, indifferent, but he didn't notice. The wind carried the smell of wet earth, rain imminent, and it felt like the universe had paused to watch. "What's in it?" he asked cautiously, because curiosity was a sin he allowed himself only rarely. Her eyes flicked to his, sharp, alert, and then she looked away. "Just things," she said, voice tight. "Memories, things that need holding." He didn't push. Caleb had learned the hard way that asking too many questions too soon could break what fragile trust was forming. The cord came loose and he eased the bundle into her lap, sitting back slightly, giving her space but not leaving. Her hands hovered over it, hesitant, reverent, like she was touching something sacred. The sun sank lower, shadows stretching long across the grass, and the air smelled of smoke and damp earth. Caleb felt an odd, restless anticipation, like the moment before a gunfight or a storm rolling in from the west. "Thank you," she said softly, almost inaudibly, and it hit him like a bullet. Just 2 words, but they carried weight, years of struggle, survival, caution, and restraint. She hadn't had a reason to trust anyone in a long time, and now she had said thank you. He swallowed hard, throat dry, and nodded. "Don't mention it," he murmured, not sure why he spoke at all. They sat in silence for a moment, the kind of quiet that isn't empty, that hums with possibility. Caleb watched her hands, the way they hovered, the slight trembling in her fingers. It wasn't fear exactly, not entirely. It was something more subtle. Hesitation, memory, pain, hope, all tangled together. "I'm Caleb," he said finally, offering the small bridge of a name. She glanced at him, eyes sharp, studying, then looked away. Elara, she replied, voice steady but soft. A name that sounded like it had been carried through the wind for miles, waiting for someone to catch it. Caleb nodded, filing the name away, feeling the weight of it settle like a stone in his chest. The shadows grew longer. The prairie stretched endlessly beyond them, empty but full of promise, danger, and secrets. Caleb felt the first stirrings of a protectiveness he hadn't known he was capable of, a need to shield this fragile, wary woman from a world that had beaten her down, scarred her, taught her to trust no one. He didn't know if she wanted it, needed it, or would resent it, but he couldn't stop it. He wouldn't. "Do you need a place to stay?" he asked gently, cautious, aware of every inflection, every subtle nuance. She hesitated, a long pause that spoke volumes. Caleb understood the decision wasn't just about shelter. It was about safety, trust, surrender. Finally, she nodded slightly, barely, and the tension in her shoulders eased marginally. It was a start. He stood, brushing dust from his pants, then gestured toward the ranch house silhouetted against the darkening sky. "Follow me," he said, voice steady. She lifted the bundle, holding it close as they walked. The distance between them felt enormous, yet intimate, each step measured, deliberate, careful not to cross invisible boundaries. Caleb felt the pulse of the land, the rhythm of the horses' hooves, the quiet exhale of the wind through the grass. It was like the world had slowed just for this moment, for her, for them. The cabin door creaked as they entered. He gestured to a corner with a small cot, blankets folded neatly. "You can stay here, safe." "For now," she nodded, setting the bundle down carefully as if lowering a life raft onto turbulent water. Caleb noticed the faint tremor in her hands and the way her eyes lingered on the shadows dancing across the wooden floor. "Food?" she asked softly, voice wary but practical. He chuckled faintly, a low rumble. "That, I can manage." He went to the stove, filling a small pot with water for tea. Bread laid out on the counter. She watched, silent, like a predator and prey caught in a moment of truce. Caleb felt the weight of her gaze, but he didn't flinch. He had seen too much, survived too long, to be intimidated by quiet eyes. When the tea was ready, he placed a cup near her cot, watching her from a distance. She didn't reach for it immediately, just sat, fingers entwined, thinking, weighing, deciding. Caleb leaned against the wall, arms crossed, heart steady, but mind racing. She had walked into his life like a storm, fierce, unpredictable, demanding, and yet he felt alive in a way he hadn't in years. Finally, she reached for the tea, fingers brushing the cup, careful, almost reverent. She sipped slowly, letting the warmth spread through her hands, through her chest. Caleb watched, noting the subtle relaxation in her posture, the tiniest exhale of tension. It was progress, fragile and slow, but real. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows, carrying the scent of rain and the dust of the plains. Caleb glanced at the sky, then back at her. And for the first time in a long time he felt the stirrings of something he hadn't allowed himself to name. Hope. The kind of hope that comes quietly, unannounced, but settles deep into your bones. And in that quiet cabin, under the dim light and the shadows of the western plains, two lives broken, wary and yet stubbornly alive, had begun to converge. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one brewing between them. A storm of trust, fear, curiosity, and something more primal, something dangerous and necessary. He didn't know how it would unfold, or if it would be safe. He only knew he couldn't let it go. And that was the beginning. Morning came slow over the plains, the sun inching over the horizon in thin golden slivers, illuminating the cabin in warm, forgiving light. Elara was awake before him, sitting near the window, eyes tracing the outlines of the rolling grass and distant timber. Her hair fell loose, untamed, catching the light like strands of fire. She held the bundle close, brushing a thumb across the leather like it contained the last thread of her sanity. Caleb stirred, yawning, his boots scuffing the wooden floor. He didn't speak at first, didn't want to break the fragile calm that had settled over them overnight. She turned toward him, eyes sharp, measuring. "You make a habit of waking early?" she asked, voice quiet but steady. Caleb shrugged, scratching at the stubble along his jaw. "Sunrises. Horses need feeding. Fences don't fix themselves." Her lips curved slightly, a flicker of humor hiding under caution. She moved to the door, stepping out into the morning air. The wind carried the scent of fresh earth and sage. Caleb followed, keeping a few paces behind, letting her set the pace. The corral awaited, the horses shifting their weight, nostrils flaring. Elara approached her mare with careful hands, brushing dust from her flank. Caleb watched, noting the deliberate, cautious movements, every action precise, aware, like she feared mistakes more than consequences. He stepped closer, holding a bucket of water. She didn't flinch, only glanced at him once, a silent acknowledgement of his presence. "Careful with her," he said softly. "She's skittish." She nodded without looking up, dipping the bucket gently. Caleb's gaze followed the mare, then drifted to her hands. There was a tremor still, subtle, almost imperceptible, but it spoke volumes about nights spent surviving alone, about the trust she had yet to offer the world. Breakfast was simple, shared in the quiet hum of dawn, bread, tea, and silence. Caleb observed her, noting the way she picked at her meal, cautious, wary. "You don't talk much," he said finally, breaking the hush. She shrugged, not looking at him. "Talking gets you in trouble," she said, voice tight. Caleb nodded, understanding. He'd learned the same lesson. Long ago, some words were weapons, some silences were shields. Later she approached the barn, bundle in hand, and Caleb followed at a distance. She set it down carefully, kneeling as if every movement were a ritual. The cord was frayed, the leather worn from years of use and neglect. Caleb knelt beside her, hands hovering, sensing the weight of unspoken history between them. "Let me," he said softly, brushing a thumb across the strap. She flinched at first, then exhaled slowly, letting him take over. The bundle opened to reveal simple tools: a worn sewing kit, a faded scarf, letters yellowed with age, a small journal with pages curling at the edges. Caleb's gaze lingered on the journal, sensing the life inside it. "Pain, resilience, survival, these all yours?" he asked. She nodded, eyes fixed on the ground. "Everything I could save. Everything I could carry." His chest tightened. Was an intimacy here he wasn't prepared for, a trust that wasn't freely given, but painstakingly earned. "Why carry it all?" he asked gently. She paused, lips pressed tight. "Because if I let go, it's like letting go of myself," she said finally, voice low, almost a whisper. Caleb felt the truth of it in his bones. He knew that feeling, carrying memories like weight, chains no one else could see, burdened by what had been lost and what might never be reclaimed. The morning passed, slow and deliberate. Caleb and Elara worked side by side in the barn, repairing fences, mending tools, stacking hay. There was no rush, only careful movements, the rhythm of labor and silence. Occasionally, their hands brushed, a spark igniting, quickly smothered by caution. Neither spoke of the night before, nor the tension, nor the unspoken understanding forming between them. Words could wait. Trust could not. By midday, the sun hung high, relentless, baking the earth until it cracked. Caleb leaned against a post, wiping sweat from his brow. Elara approached, carrying a small bundle of mended leather straps. "These they might work," she said, voice tentative. Caleb took them, inspecting each one, nodding in approval. "Good work," he said, eyes meeting hers. There was a pause, a silent acknowledgement of competence, skill, and courage. She nodded, stepping back, careful not to let anything more pass between them. Later, they rested, shade of the oak, water and bread shared in quiet. Caleb glanced at her, noticing the faint line of exhaustion etched across her face. "You've been on the move a long time," he said softly. She didn't respond immediately, only traced a finger along the edge of the leather bundle. "Long enough," she finally said, voice almost a whisper. Caleb nodded, respecting her boundaries, understanding that some stories were too heavy to speak aloud. The tension between them simmered, unspoken, yet tangible. Caleb sensed it in the air, in the careful distance she kept, in the subtle tremor of her fingers when she touched the bundle. He knew she had survived by trusting no one, by keeping her world contained, controlled, private. And yet here she was, letting him help, letting him see pieces of herself she had hidden for years. It was fragile, dangerous, beautiful. As the day waned, Caleb moved to repair the gate, tools in hand, sweat dripping down his face. Elara watched, leaning against the post, eyes scanning the horizon. There was a wariness in her posture, a readiness to retreat, but also a subtle curiosity. She wanted to understand him, to see what kind of man could carry this land, this life, and still offer hands, gentle, steady, and unyielding. "Careful with that," she said suddenly, voice sharper than before. Caleb glanced up, hand pausing mid-swing. "What?" She pointed to the tool, then back at him. "Don't drop it," she said, lips tight. "It's important." Caleb's brow furrowed. He realized then that everything about her was laid, every movement, every word, every hesitation, a defense, a shield, and she was letting him navigate it slowly, step by careful step. Evening approached, the sky bruised with the first hints of purple and red. Caleb lit a small fire outside, the scent of burning wood mingling with the dry earth. Elara sat near the flames, the bundle at her side, watching quietly. Caleb joined her, hands rough, calloused, moving with ease as he added small kindling to the fire. Silence fell between them, but it was no longer heavy. It was expectant, like the pause before a story unfolds, the hush before a storm breaks. "You ever feel?" Caleb began, pausing, unsure if the words should be spoken. "Like some things, they follow you no matter where you go." Elara's eyes met his, sharp and assessing. "All the time," she replied quietly, voice steady, though the hint of pain lingered underneath. Caleb nodded, understanding. That shared recognition, that acknowledgement of haunted pasts and survival, was a bridge they hadn't built yet. But would she shifted, moving the bundle closer, fingers brushing the leather. Caleb watched, careful, hesitant, sensing the fragile line between offering help and overstepping. He didn't touch, didn't reach, only observed. There was a trust forming, subtle and slow, like a river carving a path through hard stone. Each gesture mattered, each pause mattered, each moment was a step closer to understanding, to connection. Night fell fully. Stars scattered across the endless sky like silver dust. The fire crackled, shadows dancing across their faces. Caleb finally spoke, voice low, deliberate. "You're safe here," he said. "For tonight, for as long as you need." Elara nodded, fingers lingering on the bundle, lips pressed tight. She didn't smile, didn't speak further, only allowed herself a small breath, a subtle release. Caleb felt it toother shift, the moment when tension loosens, just slightly, when trust begins its quiet work. He didn't know how long it would last, how fragile it was, or what tomorrow would bring. But for now, here, under the stars, with the plains stretching endlessly around them, something had changed, something small, fragile, undeniable. And in that moment, Caleb realized he was no longer alone in his life, no longer just a man tending a ranch. He had a witness now, someone who saw, someone who understood, someone who carried her own burdens but allowed a piece of herself to be seen. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the promise of rain, of change, of stories yet to be told. Caleb and Elara sat in quiet, letting the night speak for them, letting the firelight and shadows hold what words could not. Tomorrow the work would continue. The plains would remain harsh, the past would still whisper in the corners of their minds. But tonight, they had this moment. This fragile, precarious, hopeful moment, and that was enough. Dawn broke slowly, a soft haze over the horizon, the plains stretching in endless gold and green. Elara was already awake, hands clasped around the leather bundle. Caleb stirred, boots scuffing the wooden floor, the familiar creak echoing through the cabin. Neither spoke immediately, words weren't necessary yet. The night had shifted something between them, a quiet understanding that hung in the air heavier than smoke or dust. She moved first, slipping outside, bare feet brushing the dew-covered grass. The chill clung to her skin, and Caleb hesitated only a moment before following. The horses in the corral shifted, sensing movement. Elara approached a bay mare, running a careful hand along its neck. Caleb watched, admiring the precision in her movements, the caution, the respect. There was trust here, a fragile bridge being built across years of solitude and hardship. "You're careful," he said quietly, stepping closer. She didn't look up, only tilted her head. "I've learned to be," she said softly. Her voice carried weight, the kind that only comes from living through things no one else understands. Caleb nodded, sensing the depth behind each word. Silence followed, heavy but comfortable, the kind of quiet where understanding doesn't need explanation. The morning passed in a rhythm both new and familiar. Caleb tended the fence lines, repairing loose planks and reinforcing weak posts. Elara worked with him, hauling buckets of water, checking the livestock. Occasionally their hands brushed, and for a moment, time froze. The warmth of her skin, the rough calluses on his hands, the shared effort. It was a small, electric tether that neither fully acknowledged. Later, near the oak tree where they had rested the day before, she approached him, holding the leather bundle in her hands. Caleb paused, sensing the tension in her movements, the hesitation, the quiet request in the curve of her shoulders. "It's too tight," she whispered suddenly, voice low, eyes not meeting his. Caleb froze, his heart skipping a beat, the words hanging in the air like smoke. He stepped closer slowly, hands raised in a gesture of patience. "What is?" he asked carefully. She held out the bundle, fingers trembling slightly. "The straps. They're too tight," she said again, almost afraid, almost daring him to respond. Caleb's eyes softened, realizing this wasn't about the leather, the tools, or even the bundle. It was about trust, about allowing someone else to care for the small, essential parts of her life. He knelt beside her, careful not to crowd, careful not to startle. His fingers brushed hers as he adjusted the straps, loosening just enough for comfort, enough to let her breathe. She exhaled softly, a breath that had been held for far too long. Caleb's heart ached at the fragility of it, at the strength it took for her to let him in even this far. "There," he said gently, standing slowly. Her eyes finally met his, wide and wary, but with a hint of relief. "Better." Caleb nodded, offering a small, almost imperceptible smile. She gave the slightest nod, a gesture of trust, small but monumental. For the first time, Caleb felt like the distance between them, the walls built by fear, by survival, by past betrayals, had begun to crumble. The afternoon brought more work. They moved through the ranch in tandem, repairing fences, tending livestock, hauling water from the nearby creek. The sun was relentless, but neither complained. Their shared labor was more than necessity. It was a language of connection. Each movement, each glance, each careful step toward understanding. Caleb noticed the way she moved now, not just with caution but with purpose, confidence slowly threading through her actions. As evening approached, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and brooding. Caleb and Elara worked quickly, securing the barn doors, tying down hay bales, ensuring the animals were safe. The wind picked up, rustling the tall grass, tugging at loose strands of hair. Caleb glanced at her, noticing the small ways she had begun to relax, the subtle ease in her stance, the trust in her hands as she worked beside him. When the first drops of rain fell, they ran to the cabin, laughing softly as they dashed through the mud. The storm crashed around them, thunder rolling across the plains, lightning slicing the sky. Caleb lit the fire, smoke curling upward, mingling with the scent of wet earth. Elara stood near the window, watching the storm, the leather bundle cradled in her arms. "You made it," Caleb said quietly, joining her by the window. She didn't speak, only nodded, her eyes following the rain as it streaked the glass. Caleb placed a hand lightly on her shoulder, careful not to overstep, careful not to break the fragile thread of trust that connected them. She didn't pull away, she didn't flinch. That was enough. The night stretched on, the storm a constant rhythm outside, the fire crackling between them. Caleb and Elara moved slowly, carefully, finding their way through unspoken words, tentative glances, small gestures of care. She handed him the leather bundle again, letting him inspect it, adjust it, secure it for the night. Each touch, each action, was a quiet testament to the bond forming between them. Hours passed. The fire burned low. Caleb finally sat back, exhaustion and relief settling into his bones. Elara remained near the window, eyes tracing the storm's path, the wind tugging at her hair. Finally she spoke, voice soft, almost inaudible over the rain. "Thank you," she said. Caleb's heart tightened. Not for the leather, not for the work, it was the weight of the acknowledgement. The recognition of care, of protection, of trust earned. "You don't need to thank me," he said gently. She turned, eyes meeting his vulnerability and strength intertwined. "I do," she said, "for noticing, for helping, for staying." Caleb nodded, words failing him. This was not about heroics. This was not about drama. This was about connection, about two lives threading together in the quiet, raw expanse of the West. The storm passed slowly, leaving the plains glistening under a soft moonlight. Caleb and Elara moved outside, checking the animals, inspecting the fences, making sure the ranch had survived the night. The world was calm now, the storm spent, leaving only the scent of rain and the promise of new beginnings. Elara approached Caleb, small steps, deliberate. "It's easier now," she whispered, the leather bundle resting at her side. Caleb's chest ached with a mixture of relief and hope. "Easier how?" he asked gently. She looked up at him, eyes bright but wary, a flicker of something unspoken passing between them. Trust," she said softly. Caleb nodded, understanding. It was not complete, not absolute, but it was the first step. As dawn approached the next day, they moved through the ranch in silent harmony. Tasks were done side by side, no words needed, only gestures and glances. The distance between them had narrowed, walls beginning to crumble. Caleb noticed the subtle ease in her movements, the small smiles, the way her eyes lingered, curious but cautious. By afternoon they paused near the creek, the sun high, warming the damp earth. Caleb knelt, checking a broken fence post. Elara approached, careful, carrying tools, a willingness in her step he had never seen before. They worked together seamlessly, hands brushing, occasional laughter, a rhythm forming between them that spoke louder than words ever could. Later, they rested under the oak tree. Caleb poured water into a small tin cup, offering it to her. She accepted, hands steady, fingers brushing his briefly. The simple touch, the shared effort, the quiet acknowledgement of presence, it was monumental, a bridge across years of solitude and survival. Night fell, and the cabin glowed softly under the moonlight. Caleb lit the fire, warmth filling the small space. Elara settled near him, leather bundle at her side, finally allowing herself to relax. The past still whispered, the plains still held secrets, but for the first time, they were not alone. "Tomorrow," Caleb said softly, voice steady, "we continue, together." She nodded, eyes reflecting the firelight, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Together," she echoed. And under the vast, endless sky of the western plains, two lives, scarred and cautious, began to merge, not in grand gestures, not in rushed confessions, but in quiet moments of care, in trust slowly given, in the shared rhythm of survival. The leather bundle lay between them, a symbol of history, of resilience, of the stories carried forward. Caleb knew the journey was far from over. The ranch would demand hard work, the world would test their trust, and the shadows of their pasts would linger. But for the first time he believed that they could face it all not as solitary figures against the wild, but as partners, bound by understanding, respect, and the fragile, unspoken promise of hope. And somewhere in that quiet, under the moonlight, Caleb realized the truth of it. Some things, some people, were worth holding on to, even when the world had taught you to let go, even when survival had hardened your heart, even when trust was a luxury few could afford. Tonight, for the first time in a long while, they slept without fear, without walls, without distance. The plains stretched endlessly around them, the wind whispering softly through the grass, carrying the scent of rain, of earth, of life renewed. And as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the ranch, the land, their fragile bond all waited, patient, enduring, and eternal.